Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the resilient people of the Republic of the Philippines. At the onset, allow me to fully associate my delegation with the statement made by the distinguished ambassador of the Republic of Fiji on behalf of G77 and China, as well as a statement made by Nicaragua on behalf of the like-minded developing countries. First and foremost, the people of the Philippines and our delegation here for the United Nations Climate Change Convention's 19th Conference of the Parties here in Warsaw, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your expression of sympathy to my country in the face of this national difficulty. In the midst of this tragedy, the delegation of the Philippines is comforted by the warm hospitality of Poland, with their people offering us warm smiles everywhere we go. Hotel staff and people on the streets, volunteers and personals within the National Stadium have warmly offered us kind words of sympathy. So thank you, Poland. The arrangements you have made for this COP is also most excellent, and we highly appreciate the tremendous effort you have put into the preparation for this important gathering.
We also thank all of you, friends and colleagues in this hall and from all corners of the world as you stand beside us in this difficult time. I thank all countries and governments who have extended their solidarity and for offering assistance to the Philippines. I thank the youth present here and the billions of young people around the world society who stand steadfast behind my delegation and who are watching us shape their future. I thank civil both who are working on the ground as we race against time in the hardest hit areas, and those who are here in Warsaw, prodding us to have a sense of urgency and ambition. We are deeply moved by this manifestation of human solidarity. This outpouring of support proves to us that as a human race, we can unite, that as a species, we care. It was barely 11 months ago in Doha when my delegation appealed to the world to open our eyes to the stark reality that we face. As then we confronted a catastrophic storm that resulted in the costliest disaster in Philippine history. Less than a year hence, we cannot imagine that a disaster much bigger would come. With an apparent twist of fate, my country is being tested by this hellstorm called Super Typhoon Haiyan, which has been described by experts as the strongest typhoon that has ever made landfall in the course of recorded human history. It was so strong that if there was a category 6, it would have fallen squarely in that box. Up to this hour, we remain uncertain as to the full extent of the devastation, as information trickles in an agonizingly slowly manner because electricity lines and communication lines have been cut off and may take a while before these are restored.
The initial assessment showed that Haiyan left a wake of massive devastation that is unprecedented, unthinkable, and horrific, affecting two-thirds of Philippines, with about 500,000 people now rendered homeless, and which sends reminiscent of the aftermath of a tsunami. With a vast wasteland of mud and debris and dead body, according to satellite estimate, the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration also estimate the Haiyan achieved a minimum pressure between around 860 millibar HPA, 25.34 in Hg, and the Joint Typhoon Warning Center estimate Haiyan to have attained 1 minute sustained wind of 315 km per hour, 195 meter per hour, and goes up to 378 km per hour, 235 meter per hour, making it the strongest typhoon in modern record history. Despite the massive effort that my country had extended in preparing for the onslaught of this monster of a storm, it was just a force too powerful. And even as a nation familiar with storm, Super Typhoon Haiyan was nothing we have ever experienced before, or perhaps nothing that any country had ever experienced.
The picture in the aftermath is ever so slowly coming into clear focus. The devastation is colossal, and as if this is not enough, another storm is brewing again in the warm waters of the western Pacific. I shudder at the thought of another typhoon hitting the same place where people have not yet even managed to begin standing up. To anyone who continues to deny the reality that is climate change, I dare you to get off your ivory tower and away from the comfort of your armchair. I dare you to go to the islands of the Pacific, the islands of the Caribbean, and the islands of the Indian Ocean. See the impacts of rising sea levels. To the mountainous regions of the Himalayas and the Andes, to see communities confronting glacial floods. To the Arctic, where communities grapple in the fast dwindling polar ice caps, to the large deltas of the Mekong, the Ganges, the Amazon, and the Nile, where lives and livelihoods are drowned. The hills of Central America that confront similar monstrous hurricanes, to the vast savannas of Africa, where climate change has likewise become a matter of life and death as food and water become scarce. Not to forget the massive hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico and the eastern seaboard of North America. And if that is not enough, you may want to pay a visit to the Philippines right now.
The science has given us a picture that has become much more in focus. The IPCC report on climate change and extreme events underscored the risks associated with changes in the patterns as well as frequency of extreme weather events. Science tells us that simply climate change will mean more intense tropical storms. As the earth warms up, that would include the oceans. The energy that is stored in the waters of the Philippines will increase the intensity of typhoons, and the trend we now see is that more destructive storms will be the new norm. This will have profound implications on many of our communities, especially those who struggle against the twin challenges of the development crisis and the climate change crisis. Typhoons such as Yolanda and its impacts represent a sobering reminder to the international community that we cannot afford to procrastinate on climate action. Warsaw must deliver on enhancing ambition and should muster the political will to address climate change. In Doha, we asked, if not us, then who? If not then where? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? It may have fell on deaf ears then, but here in Warsaw, we may very well ask these same forthright questions. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? If not here in Warsaw, where? What my country is going through as a result of this extreme climate change event is madness. The climate crisis is madness. We can stop this madness right here in Warsaw.
It is the 19th COP, but we might as well stop counting because my country refuses to accept that a COP 30 or a COP 40 will be needed to solve climate change. And because it seems that despite the significant gains we have had since the UNFCCC was born, 20 years hence we continue to fail in fulfilling the ultimate objective of the convention. Now, we find ourselves co- ni- in a situation where we have to ask ourselves, can we ever attain the objective set out in Article 2, which is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system? By failing to meet the objective, the convention, we may have ratified the doom of vulnerable countries, and we have failed to meet the objective of the convention. We have to confront the issue of loss and damage. Loss and damage from climate change is a reality today across the world. Developed country emissions reductions targets are dangerously low and must be raised immediately. But even if they were in line with the demand of reducing 40 to 50% below 1990 levels, we would still have locked in climate change and would still need to address the issue of loss and damage. We find ourselves at a critical juncture and the situation is such that even the most ambitious emissions reductions by developed countries who should have been taking the lead in combating climate change in the past 2 decades will not be enough to avert the crisis. It is now too late to talk about the world being able to rely on Annex I countries to solve the climate crisis. We have entered a new era that demands global solidarity in order to fight climate change and ensure that pursuit of sustainable human development remains at the fore of the global community's efforts. This is why means of implementation for developing countries is even more crucial.
It was the Secretary General of the UN Conference on Environment and Development, Earth Summit, Rio de Janeiro, 1992, Maurice Strong, who said that history reminds us that what is not possible today may be inevitable tomorrow. We cannot sit and stay helpless staring at this international climate stalemate. It is now time to take action. We need an emergency climate pathway. I speak for my delegation. More than that, I speak for the countless people who will no longer be able to speak for themselves after perishing from the storm. I also speak for those who have been orphaned by this tragedy. I also speak for the people now racing against time to save survivors and alleviate the suffering of the people affected by the disaster. We can take action drastic now to ensure that we prevent a future where super typhoons are a way of life, because we refuse, as a nation, to accept a future where super typhoons like Haiyan become a fact of life. We refuse to accept that running away from the storms, evacuating our families, suffering from the devastation and misery, having to count our dead become a way of life. We simply refuse to. We must stop calling events like these as natural disasters. It is not natural when people continue to struggle to eradicate poverty and pursue development and get battered by the onslaught of monster storm now considered as the strongest storm to ever hit the land. It is not natural when the science already tells us that the global warming will induce more intense storms. It is not natural when the human species has already profoundly changed the climate.
Disasters are never natural. They are the intersection of factors other than physical. They are the accumulation of the constant breach of economic, social, and environmental thresholds. Most of the time, disaster is the result of inequality, and the poorest people of the world, oh my God, the poorest people of the world are the greatest risk because of their vulnerability and decades of maldevelopment, which I must assert is connected to the kind of pursuit of economic growth that dominates the world. The same kind of pursuit of so-called economic growth and unsustainable consumption that has altered the climate system. Now, if you will allow me to speak on a more personal note, Super Typhoon Haiyan made landfall in my family's hometown, and the devastation is staggering. I struggle to find words even for images that we see from the news coverage. I struggle to find words to describe how I feel about the losses and damages we have suffered from this cataclysm. Up to this hour, I agonize while waiting for the word as to the fate of my very own relatives. What gives me renewed strength and great relief was when my brother succeeded in communicating with us that he has survived the onslaught. In the last 2 days, has been gathering bodies of dead with his own two hands, is hungry and weary as the supplies find it difficult to arrive in the hardest hit areas.
We call on the COP to pursue work until the most meaningful outcome is in sight, until concrete pledges had been made to ensure mobilization of resources for the Green Climate Fund, until the promise of the establishment for a loss and damage mechanism has been fulfilled, until there is assurance on finance for adaptation, until concrete pathways for reaching the committed $100 billion have been made, until we see a real ambition on stabilizing greenhouse gases concentrations. We must put the money where our mouths are. In solidarity with my countrymen who are struggling to find food back home, and with my brother who has not had food for the last 3 days. In all due respect, Mr. President, and I mean no disrespect for your kind hospitality, I will now commence a voluntarily fasting for the climate. This means I will voluntarily refrain from eating food during the COP until a meaningful outcome is in sight. This process under the UNFCCC has been called many names. It has been called a farce. It has been called an annual carbon intensive gathering of useless frequent flyers. It has been called many names, with, but it has also called a project to save the planet. It has been called saving tomorrow today. We can fix this. We can stop this madness right now, right here, in the middle of this football field. I call on you to lead us and let Poland be forever known as the place we truly cared to stop this madness. Can humanity rise to the occasion? I still believe we can.